Are there good reasons to believe in a God? Not that will convince anyone except the already religiously deluded, and that's kind of the point. They can't come up with any reasons that sound good to anybody but them. But can't anyone do that? Flat earthers can come up with reasons that sound good to other flat earthers, but they sound utterly insane to anyone outside of the cult. Because it is insane. Why can't they figure this out? We're back with Casey Cole and Breaking in the Habit and his increasingly ludicrous reasons to believe in God. Because the truth is, he has no good reasons, only really terrible ones. He just really wants it to be true. He can't demonstrate that any of it is, but this is all about his own personal faith and fifis and absolutely nothing else. And that is just stupid. Not that he cares. Not that any of them care. It just proves what a bunch of buffoons the religious actually are. So let's get back to it.
There must be a first cause, a first mover of history that is outside of time and space.
Says who? This is really the question that flusters a lot of theists, and I'm sure that Casey would be no different. How do they know that? And don't let them pick up the goalposts. Hold their feet to the fire. Because the only answer you're likely to get is, well, it sounds good to me. So what? I've taken to asking them how they can justify that position, leaving their faith and their emotions entirely behind, and they can't even come up with an answer. But I really like the idea. So what? Justify this entire absent your personal emotional state. And they'll just stare at you because they've got nothing else. It's really pretty sad.
There must be a reason why there is something rather than nothing.
Nobody says that there was nothing, or could have even been nothing, but you idiots. That's like saying, why is there Satan and not Ammon? Well, why would there be either? It's all just made up. They just assume things that are consistent with their own personal worldview, but which are not demonstrable in the actual real world. They have never justified their worldview in the first place. It just feels good. And that's kind of a problem, right? Not for them, because they're incapable of considering any other options. They just have to be right because it makes them feel good. But that's dumb. But then again, just look at who we're talking about.
For many, the illogical nature of purely material existence is enough to believe.
Not illogical, scary. And that's what's really going on here. They are terrified to live in a world where they aren't special, where they don't have anybody watching over them and there isn't a divine plan that's just going to whisk them away from death into a magical happy land where they can be orgasmically happy forever. They don't want reality. They are terrified of reality, which is why they make up these fantasy stories in their heads. These are people who have never matured into rational adults. They're still emotionally 6 years old. Then they try to tell us that there's something wrong with us. Yeah, go figure.
Others begin with the human experience, the intimate knowledge of self.
No, they begin with how they want humanity to be. This all comes down to what they wish was true, not what they can demonstrate actually is. They don't have an intimate knowledge of self. They only have beliefs about what they want themselves to be. And this is really, really common. This is the basis for the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people with limited competence vastly overestimate their own abilities, such that they think themselves far more intelligent than they actually are, and far more important than actual experts in the field. And this is why it's so important to take yourself out of the situation, at least as much as you can, and evaluate that evidence independently. Your faith and your fifis don't matter. You don't matter. Only that external evidence does. And they have no interest in that. No interest at all.
Within our being is a desire to know.
But that doesn't mean that you do. This is just fifis talking, and Casey plays into that almost all the time. Well, we really wish this was true. But that doesn't make it true. Just because you can talk yourself into believing things that aren't demonstrable, that doesn't mean that you're doing anything of value. In fact, it pretty well proves that you're not. Not that you care or anything.
Our nature is disposed to discovery, self-reflection, and identity, inexhaustible desires within us that reach forward infinitely. With everything we learn, everything we answer, we are left with 10 more questions, leaving us to conclude that we are not beings that will ever be satisfied with something, but rather seeking out infinity itself, God.
But that's just a name that you're slapping onto it. Again, it's something that a lot of religions do. But I want it to be whatever label their faith happens to slap onto it, and suddenly that becomes an imaginary thing to strive after. But that doesn't make any of it real. This is why I say that they don't care. Because they're only after comfort, not objective reality. They don't want to understand the real world that they actually live in. They just want to embrace a security blanket and play make-believe because it's a whole lot easier to deal with than to actually look at what's going on. Sadly, a lot of people try to defend this, not just among the religious, but everywhere. Well, who cares if they believe nonsense if it makes them happy? Well, I do, because our beliefs inform our actions, and if you believe irrational, ridiculous things, then you are more likely to do things that are going to negatively impact society, especially if those beliefs are widespread. You are harming everyone when you believe garbage, at least potentially so. This is self-defense. You people need to be better.
It is against the backdrop of this infinite horizon that we discover who we are and where we are going.
No, because you don't care where you're actually going. You only care about where you want to go. What stories you make up in your heads make you feel the best, but that doesn't matter, does it? We know where you're actually going. You just don't want to go there. You don't want to die. You don't want to cease existing. You have an emotionally vested interest in going on forever and ever and ever and ever. And I'm sorry, but that's not something that exists in the real world. Time to grow up and deal with that. But they won't, will they?
For many, the boundless desire within us is enough to believe.
Then they're stupid. This is why religion caters to the lowest conceivable common denominator. It goes after dumb people, which is why they're so focused in the third world these days. I mean, not that those are bad people by any means. I'm not saying that all people in the third world are dumb, but they tend to have weaknesses that the religious can exploit. They tend to be less educated, and they tend to have more pressing problems for their immediate survival. And if the religious can just lie to them and say, well, just believe this and God will provide, even though God never demonstrably provides anything, then they're a lot more likely to get converts. And that's why they tend to go after the lower classes, because the poor often have nothing to lose. Why not give God a shot? Well, when things look bad, why not indeed? But it still doesn't make any of it true, does it?
But of course, there is a final way to know.
Why does that make me feel like there's a threat coming? Now, these are always impotent threats. Well, you're going to go to hell if you don't believe and give my church money. Really? Prove hell exists beyond your own ludicrous say-so. And they can't do that, which is why they always appeal to faith. With faith, you don't need evidence. You should have it, but faith is where you go when you don't give a damn about the truth. That's what all of these religions push, right? Don't ask questions, don't have doubts. Just believe and fill the collection plate because we say so. Why can't anyone see the obvious problems inherent with that?
It is the purest and most simple of explanations. There are some of us that have personally encountered God.
No, you haven't. Not in any demonstrable way. This is why all of the personal testimonies that I have ever heard don't impress me one bit. There is no direct, demonstrable causal link between your stories and any real, verifiable God. It's just what they want to believe, and when you encounter these people, and you will, don't let them off easy. Don't care what they say. Care about what they can demonstrate. Correct them. Why not? No, you had an encounter with invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies. Why? Because I say so. What are they going to say? Let's see which side has the best evidence. Yeah, nobody has any. That's what faith does to you. It makes you stop caring about the actual truth. Nobody has ever demonstrably had any experiences with a real God. It's all just an emotionally comforting fantasy story, and those don't mean a damn thing.
Maybe we've witnessed a miracle or heard his voice speak within us. Maybe we felt undeniable comfort in the midst of tragedy, had a life-changing experience with no other explanation than God's loving hand.
But you've had absolutely none of that. That's a personal, emotional interpretation, not demonstrable, evidence-based fact. You might believe it, you might really like it, it might make you feel really good, but that doesn't make it true, and it's certainly not going to convince anyone else that it ever happened as you describe. Of course, those conversations don't tend to go anywhere with the religious because they aren't interested in what actually happened. I've run out of fingers and toes when it comes to counting the number of people who can't walk me through the steps that they actually went through, how they actually got to God done it, because they don't care. They don't have an answer to that. They will give you the beginning, and then they'll go, well, here's the stuff I didn't understand, and then they'll jump to, therefore God, because God is their comforting ace in the hole. God answers all questions when they run out of steam looking for actual evidence. It doesn't make any of it true, though, does it?
This is why I believe.
Which is why you're an idiot. This is the kind of stories that we get from most theists, though, isn't it? Here's my personal emotional interpretation of the things that I've seen, filtered through a specific religious lens that I really like the sound of, therefore it's just gotta be true. Sorry, but that's just laughable. Because when we ask you to provide evidence for your God, the best you can ever do is say, but it sounds so good to me. That's irrelevant. If I said invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies sound good to me, would you believe it? No, of course not. At least I hope not. I'm hoping you're not that dumb. Yet you can't see that you're doing the exact same thing, and we're just sitting here rolling our eyes, just like you ought to be doing with the pixie comment. You don't get a double standard. Nobody does. You just rely on it and expect everybody else to take you seriously. And that's not going to happen. Deal with it.
Truly.
Yes, you are truly an idiot.
Trusting in others, seeking God in philosophy and anthropology makes sense and give greater meaning to what I know. When it comes down to it, the reason I believe is because I have felt his healing presence in my life.
You've lied to yourself. You've been irrational. You haven't put your beliefs to any kind of objective test. And let's be honest, you just really want it to be true. Faith is the last refuge of the scoundrel. It's what they always fall back on when all of their high and mighty and ultimately empty claims are done away with. And you'll see this with a ton of apologists. William Lane Craig, con man extraordinaire, makes all kinds of arguments and claims, but when it comes right down to it, he only believes because of the supposed witness of the Holy Spirit. He believes because it makes him feel good. He's deluded himself into believing things that are not demonstrably true. And that's kind of a problem, wouldn't you say? How does anyone really argue against that? Well, I just know. No, you don't. Not in any independently verifiable way. You just believe. And just believing is just stupid.
In a time of great distress, I was given comfort and released of my pain. In moments of immense isolation, I have felt a loving embrace. I haven't seen a supernatural being in my midst and haven't had any ecstatic experiences, but I have encountered God on more than a few occasions.
Really? Prove it! Now, of course, he can't and he knows that, which is why he does this. It's a hell of a lot easier to just make emotional claims than to have to trot out verifiable evidence, and the people that he's trying to scam, they're not going to ask any difficult questions regardless. They'll believe anything you tell them so long as it makes them happy, and in turn, they will fill the collection plates because there's an implied threat there that if they don't, then God just might take offense. Well, that's a nice soul you got there. It would be a shame if anything happened to it. Because that's how religion works, and Casey is absolutely no different.
It's the sort of knowing on the level of love, a feeling that burns so powerfully and clearly that nothing could ever call it into question, and yet there's no data to convince another of its existence.
Except there is. Insert all of the fMRI stuff here. Because we can demonstrate love is real. It is a complex electrochemical reaction in your brain. We can see it clearly on brain scans. And that's not what these idiots are talking about, though. They mean it's a feeling. No, it's not. They are describing the subjective experience that they have in their heads when they are in love. And that's why a lot of people think that the human mind is separate from the physical brain. They don't care about what's actually going on. They care what makes them feel good. Even though 100% of the evidence that we have proves conclusively that you are just a reaction inside that meat sack in your head. You are not special. Stop pretending that you are. But people like Casey just show the ludicrous irrationality of a lot of humans. These are not people that you ought to be proud of. This is nothing that you ought to be proud of. You ought to be ashamed if you feel this way. Sadly, a lot of people just aren't.
That feeling, that experience, however nebulous and unverifiable for you, is enough for me.
Then you just keep proving that you are an idiot. This is like the people who are convinced that they were abducted by aliens because there are no other explanations that they are emotionally comforted by, or that they can boldly rationalize their way to, it just feels right, so it's got to be true, even if they have no evidence of any kind that it ever happened. Because that's all this is. It's just a bald rationalization. It's desperately trying to get to that emotionally comforting idea that you started with because it just feels good to you. But that doesn't mean anything, though, and far too many people are only out to stroke their own egos and just don't give a damn about the actual truth. Casey is clearly one of those people. Pretty much everybody on the religious side is as well. Pathetic, huh?
That is what inspires me to believe, what gives me life, that overcomes the many feelings of doubt in my life. Maybe that's sufficient for you, maybe it's not.
It shouldn't be for you. It shouldn't be for anyone. If it is, then you've got some serious emotional and intellectual issues. You are the one with the problems, not us. Granted, they don't like that, but too bad. This is the problem with a ton of people out there, religious and otherwise. They reject actual reality and try to substitute their own, and it doesn't work that way. Sometimes the results are irrelevant. Nothing really changes. Sometimes, like in the case with Casey, the results are potentially catastrophic, resulting in life-altering changes that may or may not be irrational. Here's a guy wearing a dress, living his life for a dude in the Vatican who makes lots and lots of money because he feels things, not because he has any good reason to think that they're actually true. This is really, really stupid, right?
Maybe if put on the spot, if asked to give your own testimony, to proclaim the kerygma yourself, you would give another answer.
I would say you're all idiots. I know back in the day, I probably would have said something similar, although I never had any events in my young life that made me feel like God saved me or anything. But I would have said that I felt God. And then, once I realized just how ridiculous the whole thing was, I learned that those feelings were all self-derived. I had a chemical reaction in my head, and because of my personal religious indoctrination, it just became, God done it. But that doesn't mean that God done it. It doesn't mean that God exists. It was a desire that I had, formed by my religious beliefs and upbringing, and I was just playing along. There was no good reason to think that any of it was actually true. It was all just a story that I told myself in my head, and it's exactly what Casey's doing here.
I tell you again, this is not a hypothetical question. People will ask you. They will want to know. Why, in a world of science, in the age of enlightenment, when so many people are choosing to no longer believe, do you say that there is a God?
Because you're an idiot. Granted, he's just preaching to the choir here, and that's what all of them do, because he doesn't have to back any of this up like he should. He wouldn't try any more than Craig does, because it's only the already faithful that have any real chance of paying him, and that's really what he's after, or at least that's what he's after for his church. The Catholic Church is not a charity after all. They expect people to pay up, even though it isn't official church policy demanding 10% of your income, because according to Catholic Answers, although the church teaches that offering some form of material support to the church is obligatory for all Catholic adults who have the ability to do so, it doesn't specify what percentage of one's income should be given. Yeah, but they've still got their hands out, don't they? Even if it isn't as blatant as, say, the Mormons. But I guess that's neither here nor there, right?
If you want to be a disciple of Christ, if you want to call yourself a Christian, you must be able to answer this question clearly and convincingly.
Then why can none of you do so? I completely reject the whole "it makes me feel good" nonsense as a legitimate and rational answer to the question. Nobody cares about your feelings but you. That isn't going to convince anybody with a brain, which is why you don't talk to people with brains. That you can rationalize your way to it, that doesn't say anything good about your own mental processes, and I think that's kind of the point. It's why, as I think we all know, there's a distinct and demonstrable negative correlation between higher education and religiosity. The smarter you are, the less likely you are to believe. And I think we're seeing why right there on screen, because these people just aren't that bright.
Know the faith so that you can proclaim the faith.
Claim that you know what you want to be true so you can pretend that it is. So why, in a video on why believe in God, is his answer so ludicrously unconvincing? I was hoping for something a little bit more profound, but all we got is, "it makes me feel good." So what? That doesn't make it true, but I think Casey's one of those apologists who doesn't even pretend that Christianity is rational. These are the people who just make me roll my eyes and kind of back away slowly, because these people have some real serious mental problems. Honestly, where else in life is "but it makes me happy" an adequate answer to any serious question? Wanting a thing to be true doesn't make that thing true, and it matters what is true. This is why, when you ask any theist about their supposed experiences with God, they will get to a certain point, and then they'll just say, "well, God done it," because they've run out of demonstrable steps. They just want it to be God. But that doesn't make it God, any more than it makes it leprechauns. Leprechauns did it. Yeah, that's dumb, and changing the name doesn't make it any better. But these are not smart people. I wish they were. At least they wouldn't make such fools of themselves on the internet all the time. But just declaring a thing to be true because you really like the idea, That only shows just how nutty you actually are. And that's not something that you or anyone else should be proud of. Knock it off. At least try for rational credibility. Care about reality. Deal with the world in which you actually live. That should be the most basic expectation that we have for anyone. Why is it not?